Holy crap, there's so many changes all at once. Gonna try my best to keep this video short and concise, but man, I thought the Rivian shutdown was mainly gonna be like under the hood changes and maybe we'd see a few things, but holy crap, they did a lot. This is like way more than I thought they were gonna do, and a lot of it is great and good and exciting, and some of it is a little perplexing. I think my overall impressions definitely have to be, I thought this was going to simplify things, and now I feel like the manufacturing line is just going to be even more complicated than it was before, but I trust Rivian, they probably know what they're doing here. So let's start with the inside and work our way out, okay? So first off, there's new interior options, but it should be mentioned this is what Rivian considers their premium interior options. There's new stitching on the seats, there's new wood coloring options, they even have like plaid stitching accents if you want to pay extra for those. Again, these are only on the new R1T and R1S Ascend vehicles, and probably the biggest change that a lot of people are going to notice, including existing Rivian owners, is their new user interface. It looks very familiar to what we saw in the Rivian R2 and R3 prototypes, where you kind of have this Borderland anime style cartoony look for the vehicle that you can switch between for different drive modes and stuff. Not everybody is on board with this, but personally, I love it. You know, Tesla definitely goes for their video game-esque, like post-apocalyptic looking software on the Cybertruck and now on my Model 3, which is cool. And I think if Rivian just would have copied that, it would have felt like, you know, a copycat. I'm glad that Rivian found a way to make their UI unique and specialized to them, but still really clean and very animated. Like, there's so much dynamic motion between switching drive modes, and this is in thanks partly to a new NVIDIA infotainment processor that's supposed to be over 10 times faster than the one they were using in R1 previously. It has the Unreal Engine powering a lot of the performance animations and different drive mode animations, so there might be some similar UI characteristics brought to existing Rivians, but I do think there's probably going to be some exclusive ones just on these new R1 vehicles. And one feature that is standard across all the new trims that I really like is the signal cameras. This is something I've gotten particularly comfortable with on my Model 3, just being able to use your blinker and see exactly what's in your blind spot. And a really good catch from Jerry Rig Everything is that all of these cameras are at 60 frames a second, and Rivian was actually claiming that all of their cameras put together have more megapixels than any other vehicle on the road today. So they should be high frame rates, high resolution cameras that allow for good response times and to keep you aware of what's going around the vehicle. That new NVIDIA processor should also be powering their new autonomy platform, so I'm guessing there's going to be some more autonomous driving features that are only available on these new R1s that aren't available on the older R1s. I apologize for existing Rivian owners, but should be noted that a lot of the UI changes to have this whole animated look is coming to the mobile app as well, and that should be any day now. A lot of these new R1 upgrades are going to start shipping within the next couple of days. Although Kyle from Out of Spec mentioned in his video that the only vehicles they're making right now are the R1S. They currently haven't restarted R1T production yet, and they're only making them currently with the LFP battery pack and the Max battery pack, which I'll dive into in a little bit. And there's a lot of changes when it comes to the batteries and the powertrains, but I should note that with all of these new features and changes going on outside of the vehicle, there's also some changes that I think they're doing intentionally right now with this big refresh because they want you to be distracted by all of the good stuff, and that's fair. But in order to achieve a gross profit on these vehicles by the end of this year, they're definitely taking some things out and, in my opinion, complicating the lineup a little bit more than I would have liked. So for one, they were very happy to brag about this translucent roof. So it's actually an option. It's not standard on all R1 vehicles, but if you do spec for it, it's $1,500. So it's a very expensive glass roof option, but just through a little software toggle, it can turn clear so you can see right through it like any glass roof, or you can make it more opaque so that you can't see through it. But it seems like it still lets light through. I guess some people might like that option. I feel like you're probably just gonna pick one and leave it there at all times, so I personally wouldn't spec $1,500 for it, but it's there as an option. They're also no longer including the camping speaker at no additional charge. That used to be a standard feature. I agree with this one. I don't think everybody was using it, but if you do want to have the camp speaker, which has, you know, Bluetooth for audio and it's a lantern, it's a $650 add-on. Jeez, like, I would not be specking $650 for a camping speaker. I think by default now, now it's just gonna be a little drawer that you can throw whatever you want in. Also, another change is the air compressor, or as Rivian calls it, the utility panel, which has some hooks, and of course that's where you control the air compressor. That is no longer a standard feature. That's now a $650 add-on, again, if you're speccing it from the standard configuration. And I'm sorry, but I spent like 15 bucks on a little air compressor that sits in the sub-trunk of my Model 3, and it works great. I hit a nail the other day, and I was able to top it off really easy, and I would just not be spending 650 bucks on an air compressor, personally. I'm sure Rivian's is better, but for 650, you increase the budget for third-party air compressors, which are way more versatile, and they have lots of different options to choose from, so I also probably wouldn't spec it. But I think from a manufacturing simplicity standpoint, it's probably a good call to decide, yeah, you know what, not everybody needs an onboard air compressor. There's also some talk online that they've tweaked the frunk a little bit. It seems like the opening itself is a little bit smaller than it used to be, but it goes a little bit deeper, perhaps. So the jury is still out on whether or not the frunk is actually better or worse than before. It'll probably be up to you guys to decide, but they had tweaked it a little bit, probably because there's a heat pump now. But the other thing that I have to admit is a little bit worse than I initially thought is Rivian Connect Plus. So yeah, there's a lot of cellular connectivity features that have been on Rivians for a while, and they had warned everybody that they were going to switch to a paid option, but we didn't know what it was going to cost and exactly what features they were going to restrict to the paid membership. And it ended up being a little bit more pricey than I would have liked. So it's 15 bucks a month, which I get it, it's an expensive car, why not pay another membership? But I don't know, I just hate that everything has to have a membership now and everything's getting so expensive. So that's a little bit steep, and it has a bunch of features that were paywalled like we expected, like the personal hotspot, so if you wanted to connect your phones in the car to the Wi-Fi that the Rivian provided, that's going to be a paid feature now. Satellite view, that's the same thing as Tesla. Music streaming and voice controls through Amazon's Alexa and stuff like that. But the harsh one for me is just the access to Google Cast and YouTube. That's a paid feature. As far as I can tell, they're not saying that you can access YouTube on the Rivian via Wi-Fi, like use your phone's hotspot. No, they're just straight up saying the only way to watch YouTube is if you pay 15 bucks a month, which is a little bit steep for me. There's an annual option that's $150 for the year, which is a little bit better, but still not great. But I guess that's the world we're living in. Tesla's premium connectivity is a little bit cheaper, but also doesn't do as many things as Rivian, so what can I say? I guess we're in the membership world. Even my channel's got a membership now. It's crazy. Another change I could see some people not liking is Rivian is moving towards a button on the doors to unlatch them instead of having a physical latch like they did before. There's still a manual override that's pretty easy to access on the front doors, but the back doors, they embed it behind an interior piece, which is like, you know, in an emergency, is anybody really gonna know how to do that? Tesla does the same thing. From what I can tell, buttons and digital unlocking tends to be a lot cheaper for manufacturing, so I get why Rivian does it, but still, a lot of people may not like that change. But that's enough criticism. Rivian did a lot of cool stuff today, especially with the battery packs and powertrain, so let's talk about those. There's really 3 powertrain options, and Rivian presents them as 4. There's 2 different dual motor options. There's regular dual motor, which is standard, and then dual motor performance, but people online are saying that's a software unlock. There's not a lot of hardware differences between the two. It's like $5,000, and Rivian will probably let you unlock a regular dual motor down the road just via over-the-air update if you're into that kind of thing. Still over 500 horsepower standard, which is plenty in my opinion. A 0 to 60 time in the 4-second realm, and dual motor performance gets you into the 3-second realm. But what's crazy to me is they're now bringing a tri-motor to the lineup, which was not previously there, and these are all in-house designed Rivian powertrains, and they're not the same as the dual motor enduro units. These dual motor rear-wheel drive configurations have disconnects. The front motor is the same as the dual enduro motor, but this unlocks a 0 to 60 time in just under 3 seconds, like 2.9, which is already absurd. Like, this is insanely fast for a 3-row SUV or a pickup truck. But what's interesting is I think this does kind of simplify the manufacturing a bit. If you opt for the tri-motor, which is a $100,000 option, it's not going to be ready till the end of this year, so we've got to wait a little bit. That comes with all of the new Ascend features. So that comes with the new stitching, that comes with the updated dash interior options, and that includes all of the new stuff like the translucent roof, and it still of course has by default the air compressor, the camp speaker, the blackout badge option to kind of change a lot of the silver accents to black. So it's definitely a great overall vehicle package, but they force that tri-motor configuration to have a lot more premium interiors, and they also force it to have the max battery pack, which is kind of an interesting decision because I didn't think the max battery pack was worth it. So by coupling the high powertrain with the big battery, they're kind of trying to justify these really, really high prices. The max battery pack with the tri-motor configuration should get you close to 400 miles of range, depending on the drive mode you're in. They're claiming conserve mode can get a little over 400 miles, so that's going to be quite an incredible package. Very fast, lots of off-roading capability. The tri-motor is faster and higher performing than the outgoing quad motor configuration, but while we're on the subject of quad motor, yeah, they've also redesigned the quad motor system with an in-house design powertrain, and that one is going to be basically the quickest accelerating pickup truck ever. Yes, Rivian wanted to outdo Tesla with the Cyber Beast, and apparently internally they've been doing some track tests where the quad motor is able to get a 0 to 60 time in about 2.5 seconds. So yeah, even faster than the Tesla Cyber Beast, which is cool on paper and all, but in my opinion, just completely unnecessary. This is totally just flexing. It's purely just marketing power. I don't think anybody would drive around in the tri-motor R1 and be like, yep, could be a little faster though. But it's really fun to be able to say you have the quickest accelerating pickup on the market. Tesla's probably going to have a hard time beating that one down the road, but they likely will. They'll shave it off to 2.3 seconds and then Rivian will respond. But may I just say, I love the fact that they redesigned the website and redesigned the branding of all their vehicles. This applies to the new one and the old Rivians as well, but they're now just calling them dual standard, dual large, dual max, and then tri-max and quad max. So it's basically the number of motors followed by the battery pack size. And if you want the tri-motor or quad motor, you have to get it with the max battery pack. Though we're not sure what the range of the quad max is right now. They are taking reservations for it, which is $3,000, but the quad max isn't going to be ready until 2025. So we've got a ways to go till then. They won't say what the final price is, but you can imagine it'll be over $100,000. So that kind of shows me that Rivian is doubling down on making sure that these R1 vehicles are not going to be much lower in price than they already were. They're just trying to justify the value you get when you're dropping that kind of high price money on a vehicle like this. Obviously, for cheaper vehicles, they've got the R2 and the R3 down the line, but I think most people are going to be quite excited for the new LFP battery pack, which is on the standard cheapest configuration. The upside is it's still fairly efficient, 92 kilowatt hours, and that gets you 270 miles of range. That's great. The charging curve of the LFP pack should be fine. You should be all right charging it to 100% every single day, just like my Model 3, which has lithium iron phosphate. The downside is, of course, it's a imported LFP battery, so it's not going to qualify for any tax credits unless you lease the vehicle, I suppose, but that's a whole nother financing game. And the max battery pack is pretty much the same as before, but the weird thing is the large battery pack. We've heard from Out of Spec that they're currently not building the large battery pack right now, and the old large battery was 130 something kilowatt hours. The new one is only 109, so quite a smaller usable capacity for the large pack, and it's still yet to be seen. Rivian won't tell us if it's a software limited battery pack or they're using a different chemistry or if it will qualify for the tax credit. There's a bunch of unknowns for this large pack that should get you around 330 miles of range, which I think is plenty. But the good news is if you want more range than what the LFP battery pack is offering, they are currently still producing the max battery pack for the dual motor configuration, and that, with its new heat pump efficiencies and simplified wiring harness and all that, should now unlock 420 miles of range. Really good sweet spot right there. So if you were looking for an electric truck good at towing, I think the Dual Max is gonna be a really good contender against the Silverado EV, which probably has much better charging characteristics, but it's just not out. It's hard to get your hands on one. They're only delivering to fleet buyers, whereas Rivian should start delivering this new upgraded R1 within the next couple of days, like it's in production right now. The only real way to tell from the outside of the R1 that it's a refresh is the light bar. It's not quite as white or as wide as it used to be, but they added more RGB lighting that can change for your emergency hazard lights, or when you're charging, it turns into a little bit of an indicator. I don't know if I love it more than the outgoing model, which just felt a little bit more colorful and clean, and this new one makes it look like the light bar's been kind of shrunk down and diminished a little bit, but I'd be willing to bet this new light bar and this new lighting is probably cheaper than the outgoing model, in which case it improves the margins, and I'm a fan of that because I want Rivian to exist. They've also added matrix LED lighting to the headlights, which is cool. Just like Tesla, they will move with the curvature of the road, but even though the hardware is there to do adaptive headlights that, you know, mask out oncoming cars or bikes and pedestrians, they're still waiting on a software update down the road. I think it's a regulatory issue, but yeah, those cool matrix LEDs we have on Teslas now they're on Rivians too. I have to say though, the biggest miss of this big refresh, there's a lot of great changes that I'm very excited to see, but the hardest one for me to hear, or not hear I should say, is the fact that they still didn't want to put NACS on these things. I know they claim they want to do it in 2025, but I think you're just gonna Osborne yourself. Everybody's gonna hold off on ordering until these things get the NACS port. And they didn't change to a higher voltage architecture. They didn't change the charging characteristics at all. For a vehicle with, you know, over 100 kilowatt hours, limiting it to just 220 kilowatts peak is not great, and it sounds like from what they're saying, the charging curve isn't gonna change all that much, which is probably one of the weakest specs on paper for Rivian's vehicles, is they just don't have great road trip time, not necessarily because of the range, but just because of how long it takes to refill that thing. And switching it over to a higher voltage architecture, I think, would have been a great chance to increase the charging speed and make the wiring more efficient, and I guess they just straight up weren't ready for that yet, which is a bit of a bummer. But doing this big refresh, I feel like would have been the perfect time to switch to NACS, but now we've got to wait for another, you know, mid-cycle refresh next year. But in the meantime, I guess Rivian is still selling adapters, so you can still use superchargers, of course, but it's not in a great location because you gotta occupy 2 stalls or drive up on the curve in order to reach the cable, and hopefully the Adventure network can expand at a pretty decent rate. But what do you guys think of all of Rivian's changes? Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.